Welcome back to A Different Opinion. Today we've got a pretty cool one here. I'm just kind of jumping into this Russia European conflict and all that type of stuff with Ukraine, just as a bit of a backstory, because a lot of people don't actually know why Russia invaded and what's the reasoning behind this. There is a deeper reasoning behind it, and it's like I've studied up on it quite a bit. And I mean, I was up to like 4 in the morning researching all this stuff. So quickly jump into this. This only just popped 37 minutes ago from the Washington Post. The EU proposes phasing out Russian oil imports by the end of the year. So that's massive, massive if they can do that. The European Commission has proposed a plan to phase out Russian oil imports, stepping up its efforts to cut off a key source of funding for the Kremlin. The proposal, which must still be approved by member states, reflects extended negotiations over how far the European Union should go to penalize and isolate Russia for its war in Ukraine. The phase out is more gradual than the immediate embargo some countries have been pushing for. It would ban oil imports after 6 months and refined petroleum products by the end of the year. Wow. If they can do that, I mean, Russia would be tanking big time just with the amount of money they'd be losing from sales. But I don't know where they're going to get this oil from, is the only thing. But an oil phase out would still present a dramatic shift for the EU, which in March told the United States it couldn't join a Russian energy embargo. The oil plan is a centerpiece of EU's sixth round of sanctions, a package that would also remove Russia's biggest bank, Sberbank, and two others from the SWIFT payment system. The draft plan was sent to the 27 EU members countries Tuesday to be discussed by ambassadors on Wednesday. It could be formally approved as early as the end of the week, according to diplomats and officials. Wow. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the EU has worked closely with the United States and other allies to sanction Moscow, but it had struggled to unwind a reliance of Russian fossil fuels, a vulnerability US officials and others warned about for years. In 2020, the bloc imported about 35% of its oil from Russia, along with 40% of its natural gas and nearly 20% of its coal, according to the EU Statistics Office. As long as they got the Middle East on board with the EU and America, I mean, they'll be safe. The United Arab Emirates, all those type of places, rather sell all their oil to, the allies or the NATO EU, then, I think they'll get by. They almost got to get a contract where it's just to them. Whereas I know a lot of their business goes to China as well. So, and China is not all about, just getting the American dollar as a reserve currency, trading currency, really. They want to get the yuan in there as well. So in March, when President Biden announced a US ban on Russian oil and gas, the EU said it could only commit to reduce Russian gas imports by 2/3 by year's end. Nearly a month later, as graphic footage of the atrocities in Bucha, Ukraine started circulating, the EU moved ahead with a coal ban. Well, Bucha massacre test Europe's red lines on Russian energy. EU officially hinted at action on oil would be next, but talks stalled amid strong opposition from Germany, Austria, and other countries. Thanks to price increases, Russia has continued to rake in about the same amount of money from fossil fuel sales as it did before the invasion. Wow. According to estimates by the Wednesday Group, a team of experts tracking Russian energy sales, that adds up to about $1 billion a day and possibly $1.5 billion a day in revenue. So, yeah, I mean, they're probably still getting by, and that's how they can pay for this war effort, really. The oil deal finally gained momentum last week after Germany, one of Russia's biggest customers, said it had found alternative suppliers and would be comfortable with gradual phase out. Nice. Here's where Russian oil flows. But getting to the point of a draft plan with a good chance of approval meant extensive debate on the exceptions of Hungary and Slovakia, which said they need more time and money to upgrade their oil infrastructure, diplomats and officials said. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has close ties to Russian Putin and is an ongoing standoff with the EU. Of course, Hungary would. They've got a history of always going against the norm in a way, I guess, but what is the norm really? The EU has frozen Hungary's pandemic recovery funds over concerns about democratic backsliding and rule of law breaches, and last week's triggered a mechanism that would result in a bloc holding back tens of billions of dollars. And I mean, Hungary, like, they do these things to themselves. Like, you look at the history just of their country, the people in charge anyway, the people from there are actually good people, but it's just the actual leaders of that country holds them back massively because they always seem to, kind of hold that hate towards the West as well and hate the hate towards the EU, even though in the EU. So yeah, very stupid from them. So jumps into this. Australia adds further Russian sanctions 9 hours ago. Australia has moved other sanctions more than 70 Russian politicians and more than 30 puppet Ukrainian government officials installed in the separation regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. The move comes as Ukrainian fighters say Russian forces are attacking the encircled Azov-style steelworks plants in Mariupol after the ceasefire broke down. It is believed more than 200 civilians remain trapped in bunkers. So I do think now it is updated that the Russians did move on Mariupol. So they have actually, sent troops in. Mariupol is a Ukrainian coastal city, etc., etc. So that's just pretty much what it's saying. So on 70 more Russian politicians and 30 puppet Ukrainian government. So this is pretty much where I jump into just the history of Russia back to Donetsk and, what happened in 2014 when Russia also sent soldiers in and invaded as well. Just kind of the reasoning why they did that and what led to all this conflict. So as you can see here, the war in Donbass. So this is 2014, March 2014. The conflict in Donbass region it was part of the broader Russian-Ukrainian war in March 2014, immediately following the Euromaidan protest. So the Euromaidan protest, so the demonstrations began on the night of the 21st of November, when protests erupted in the capital of Kiev after the Ukrainian government rejected draft laws that would allow the release of jailed opposition leader Yulia Tymoshenko and the suspended separations of signing of the European Union Association Agreement with the European Union to seek closer economic relations with Russia. So I'll jump into this just to kind of describe. So we'll go into it, jump to the next part, just to explain these parts to you so you actually know what they are. So the European Union Ukraine Association Agreement, it's the European Atomic Energy Community, Euratom, Ukraine, and the EU's 28 members states at the time. It established a political and economic association between the parties. The agreement entered into force on 1st of September 2017. Previously, parts had been provisionally applied. The parties committed to cooperate and converge economic policy, legislation, as well as regulations across the broad range of areas, including equal rights for workers, steps towards visa-free movement of people, the exchange of information and the staff in the area of justice, the modernization of Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and access to European investment banking. The parties committed to regular summit meetings among ministers, other officials, and experts. The agreement furthermore established a deep and comprehensive free trade area between parties. So it's pretty much just Ukraine have made an economical agreement and all that with the EU to pretty much put it, eventually it'll be a full member of the EU, which pretty much it would have been. So the political provisions of the treaty were signed on the 21st of March after a series of events had stalled in the ratification, culminating in a revolution of Ukraine and overthrow of the then incumbent president Viktor Yanukovych. Yanukovych, this man is, scum of the earth, in my opinion. This ousting was sparked by Yanukovych's last-minute refusal to sign an agreement. Russia, Ukraine's second largest trading partner, instead to present an association with the existing custom union of Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan as an alternative. After 21st of March, matters relating to trade integration were temporarily set aside, awaiting the results of the 25th Ukrainian presidential election, until the European Union, the new Ukrainian president Petro Poroshenko signed the economic part of the Ukrainian. So they were going to sign it. The president last second changed his mind. So I'll read that into you. So this is Revolution of Dignity. The Revolution of Dignity, also known as the Maidan Revolution, took place in Ukraine February 2014, the end of the Euromaidan protests, when deadly clashes between protesters and security forces in Kiev culminated in the ousting of the elected Yanukovych and the overthrow of the Ukrainian government. So Yanukovych was pretty much, mostly people know this, it's a Russian puppet, really. So he was getting funding from Russia, so he always had, pro-Russian thoughts, and obviously because, if he doesn't say what to do, Russia will just come and kill him, probably. So in November 2013, so this is about 3 months before then, A wave of large-scale protests erupted in response to Yanukovych's sudden decision not to sign a political association and free trade agreement with the European Union. So it was this massive trade agreement between Europe, the economical one, all that stuff that I just read before, and they all pretty much voted, the whole parliament voted, yes, we're going to go and join the EU trade agreement. So not be part of it, but a trade agreement to with the EU. But instead, he chose closer ties to Russia and a Eurasian economic union. In February of that year, Verkhovna Rada, Ukrainian parliament, had overwhelmingly approved of the finalizing the agreement with the EU. So they all voted, yeah, we're doing this. So Russia had put pressure on Ukraine to reject it. These protests continued for months, on their scope widened with the calls of the resignation of Yanukovych, because he's trying to last second change and say, no, we should join, a trade agreement with Russia, Kazakhstan, and all that. And I mean, what would be better for that country, really? I mean, the trade agreement with Europe looks much better. Eventually, they'll become part of Europe and they'll be able to trade freely and, travel freely between all these countries. So with the calls for Yanukovych and the Azarov government to resignate, protesters opposed that they saw the widespread government corruption and abuse of power, the influence of oligarchs, police brutality, and a violation of the human rights in Ukraine. Repressive anti-protest laws fueled further anger. A large barricade protest camp occupied Independence Square in central Kiev throughout the uprising. So this is in January now. This is about 2 months later. In January and February, clashes in Kiev between protesters and a Berkut Special Riot Police, which has now been disbanded, which is pretty much like, influenced by Russia, really, resulted in the deaths of 108 protesters and 13 police officers, and the wounding of many others. The first protesters were killed in fierce clashes with the police. Following this, protest occupied government buildings throughout the country. The deadliest clashes were on 18th to 20th. Thousands of protesters advanced towards parliament, led by activists with shields and helmets, and were fired on by police snipers. On 21st of February, an agreement between President Yanukovych and the leaders of parliamentary opposition was signed that called for the formation of the interim unity government, constitutional reforms, and early elections. The following day, police withdrew from central Kiev, which gave the under effective control to the protesters. Yanukovych fled the city, then the country. So this president, after trying to make the deal with Russia, got massive backlash. The whole country stood up to it. I believe there was, I think it was up to 800,000 protesters, I believe. And can't see the exact number up here, but it was up to 800,000 protesters across Kiev. He fled Ukraine, just out as the president, fled to Russia. So, he's definitely in Russia's pocket. I mean, if he's going to flee to the country that he was trying to make the deal with, something is happening. That's why a lot of people say, Ukraine is so corrupt, but so is every country, really, isn't it? And any country that says it's not, it's the biggest lie. Yanukovych fled the city, then the country. That day, the Ukrainian parliament voted to remove Yanukovych from office by a 328 to 0 vote. So 328 parliament members voted, none, to keep him in, but it's out of 450. So that shows me that probably 122 members, were a bit on his side, and they probably ended up leaving too. So Yanukovych said that this vote was illegal and possibly coerced, and asked Russia for help. Russia considered the overthrow of Yanukovych to be an illegal coup, and did not recognize the interim government. Widespread protests, both for and against the revolution, occurred in eastern and southern Ukraine, where Yanukovych previously received strong support in the 2010 election. These protests escalated, resulting in a Russian military intervention, the annexation of Crimea by Russia, and the creation of the self-proclaimed breakaway states of Donetsk. So let's jump into this. This is the annexation of Crimea. So this is that, remember what you heard on the news not that long ago, about 8 years ago, where Russia just pretty much went over the border, did what they needed to do, killed a lot of people, and then left. So in February 2014, February and March, this is just 1 month later, Russia invaded the subsequent annex of the Crimea Peninsula. The event took place in the aftermath of the Revolution of Dignity. On February 22nd, Russian President Putin convened an all-night meeting with security services, blah, 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 blah. about, obviously what happened. So Putin remarked that we must start working on returning Crimea to Russia. Pro-Russian demonstrators were held in Crimea's city Sevastopol. Masked Russian troops without insignia took over the Supreme Council Parliament of Crimea and captured strategic sites across Crimea. This led to the installation of the pro-Russian Sergei Askinov government in Crimea and the Crimean Status Referendum, declaration of Crimea's independence on March 16, 2014. Russia formally incorporated Crimea as two Russian federal subjects, the Republic of Crimea and the federal city of Sevastopol. Following the annexation, Russia escalated its military presence on the peninsula and leveraged nuclear threats to solidify the new status quo on the ground. Ukraine and many other countries condemned the annexation and considered it to be a violation of international law, which I believe it was, and Russians signed agreements safeguarding the territorial integrity of Ukraine, including the 1991 Brest Accords. He established the Commonwealth of Independent States, the Minsk Records, Budapest Memorandum. They went and attacked because what happened was all the pro-Russian people were pretty much in these regions. So the Donbass, so the Crimea and all that. What happened before this even, what caused it as well, is the government of Ukraine pretty much said, you can't try and make your own regions. You can't just break up and make a separatist and make your own region within our country. So let's say someone says now, all right, I'm taking this piece of land in the country. We don't believe in your laws. We don't believe in your government, but we are pro-Russian. We do believe in their beliefs and their country. So we're going to take this part of our land. We want to make this our own piece of land, and our own laws want to be on this. In my opinion, if that goes through the courts, they do a legal way of doing it, the courts accept it, say that they have a case, blah, 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 and they say, this is your part of land now. I'd say, okay, well, it went through the courts, it all happened peacefully. But for that to happen and, people to put up pictures like, we got guns, we're going to defend ourselves here. They got the backing of Russia, who just went through all of this with the ex-president and all this type of stuff with all the Russian influence. And then them to say, no, we want to, obviously this is our part of the country. So then Ukraine obviously sent their military and has been attacking these regions for a long time, especially now the regions that are being attacked now in Russia. That is another reason why as well, because these constant attacks, because people keep trying to take parts of of Ukraine, and just say we're separatists, we want this piece of the country. And I was saying, if they legally do it and the courts accept it, then fair enough. But if it's no, they get a warning from the military and say, look, you better move out because this will be attacked. And then they still say, then that, in my opinion, unfortunately, that's criminals and people that shouldn't be there. And unfortunately, I mean, there is a lot of kids mixing with this because the families believe in it that much and they don't want to let their kids go to a safer area. So they keep them in these areas and make them believe what they believe. So this is all adding into why also Russia has been attacking recently as well. It just kind of shows you there's a little bit more history than what people think. They just think, this happened. But the president breaking off, going into Russia, massive protests, people being killed, police firing on on innocent civilians. Obviously, there's two sides to the story. I mean, the news that came out there said that no, this was all brought on by Ukraine's side and their backside. Obviously, it's just NATO, America, for example, and Russia and their trading partners just controlling, them like puppets. Fortunately, it's always Ukraine and, other countries like Azerbaijan and Armenia that take the fall. And Russia just seems to be the one untouched all the time, and America, obviously, as well. And unfortunately, that's like the fighting grounds, and all these people die just to keep each other at bay. But yeah, it comes back to the war in Donbass. These demonstrations began around the same time as Russian annexation of Crimea, wider pro-Russian protests across Europe. Yeah, this pretty much is explaining what caused the war in Donbass. I mean, obviously you can read more into it as well. Yeah, we all know what happened. Russia invaded. There was an anti-terrorism, operation from 2014 until 2018, and was a renamed Joint Forces Operation by late August 2014. This operation was able to vastly shrink the territory under the control of pro-Russian forces and came close to regaining control of the Russia-Ukraine border. In the response, 2014 Russian artillery personnel that Russia has called humanitarian convoy crossed the border. Russian crossing reportedly occurred both in areas that were controlled by pro-Russian forces. As we can see here, as a result of the Russian invasion, DPR, LPR insurgents regained much of the territory. Violations of the ceasefire on both sides became common amidst the solidification of the line between insurgent and government-controlled territory. Warlords took control of the swaths of land, insurgent side, leading to further establishment. So, pretty much in the middle there, it's free for all, really. Like, it's not controlled by either government, and people were just killing each other there. Obviously with no rule of thumb. So obviously a lot of things are happening. The ceasefire collapsed in January 2015 with renewed heavy fighting across the conflict zone, including Donetsk International Airport and Debaltseve. Involved parties agreed on a new ceasefire on February 12, 2015, immediately following the signing of the agreement. Separatist forces launched the offensive and forced Ukrainian forces to withdraw from it. See, all the separatists the whole time, constantly. It should just say, war criminals or people that are pro-Russian, really. In the months after the fall of Debaltseve, minor skirmishes continued along the line of contact, but no territorial changes occurred. Both sides began fortifying their positions by building network trenches, bunkers, tunnels, turning the conflict into static trench warfare. The stalemate led the war, being labeled as estimated 6,000 Russians and 40,000 separatist troops in the region. By the end of 2017, the observatory mission had counted around 30,000 individuals in military gear crossing from Russia to the Donbass at the two border checkpoints. It was allowed to monitor the OSCE and documented many cases of military convoys crossing from Russia. Since the start of the conflict, there had been 29 ceasefires, 29 times ceasefire and keep going, each intended to remain for a force indefinitely, but none of them had stopped the violence. The most successful attempt halt fighting was in 2016 when a ceasefire held for 6 weeks. Ukraine, Russia, DPR, and LPR and OSCE agreed a roadmap for ending the conflict on October the 1st, 2019. That's 5 years conflict. However, the conflict did not thaw since, and by the late summer 2020 remained unresolved. The latest ceasefire came on force 27 July 2020, which led to Ukrainian combat losses for more than a month, according to Ukrainian authorities. From 27 July until 7th November, Ukrainian losses dropped tenfold. 3 Ukrainian soldiers were killed, and the number of attacks dropped fivefold. The first trimester of 2021 saw a large rise in Ukrainian fatalities, 25 compared to 50 deaths in the whole of 2020, and the build-up of a large Russian military force in the Donbass Russian border, and a late March to the early April 2021 from the late October, November 21 onwards. So this shows you, like, if we actually kept up with all this news the whole time, we would have known what's coming. For the governments to not think they know what was coming, I mean, they should have known that this stuff was coming. I mean, they've been in conflict for 7 years. Like, I don't think they've actually not been in conflict this whole time. So technically, they have been at war this whole time. So this isn't even a new war. This is just a bigger war where Russia invaded fully, where they pushed past just like that region. I mean, when I read into this, it kind of just opened my eyes. I was like, wow, they've been at war for this long. You look at, countries in the Middle East, you look at Armenia and Azerbaijan, which we spoke about yesterday, a couple of days ago. Same thing. They've been at war for like 20 years, just years and years, and there's no end in sight. So, but I think with this big stance, with the EU proposing stopping oil buying from Russia by the end of the year, Australia, America, the NATO countries, everything, hopefully it'll make Russia think twice and make them actually step back and, stop putting their fingers in all these little countries and wars, and hopefully the same with NATO, and just let these countries, live by themselves. But it's just so much, same as in Africa, same as in Eastern Europe, just so much corruption that's going on. Hopefully it'll stop, because, I mean, the amount of lives it lost just throughout these years are just ridiculous. So it's just a little bit of a history on this, if you didn't know it already. If you did, then sorry for wasting your time. Obviously it's on Wikipedia. There are 2 sides to each story. So the Russians have their side of the story. This is the side of, probably the West side story. So there's not really any truth in anything, really. I mean, for all that we know, this is all lies. For all that we know, all the Russians are lying. We never know. So it's just for you to make up your own thoughts, really. But all I hope for is peace. Hopefully it just stops in all countries. But obviously people are people and they never want to stop this stuff. But if you did like the video, please leave a comment. Leave a like if you want to see more, and subscribe if you want to see my videos in the future. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.